Good morning, my dear audience, and warmest welcome to the Impact webinar, Empowering APAC's Hydrogen Supply Chains, Next Dive for Global Synergy. My name is Roland Shah, and I'm a Senior Content Analyst from Media Associates. It's my great honor and privilege to be your host of today's event. This webinar is also a virtual session of Australia and APAC's largest and most influential green hydrogen event, Connecting Green Hydrogen APAC 2024, which will take place from July 9th to July 11th at Melbourne Convention and Exhibition Centre. In addition to your participation in today's webinar, we also look forward to meeting you in person at this flagship hydrogen event, which brings the highest level decision makers across the entire hydrogen value chains, including Air Products, Origin Energy, Engine, Orica, APA Group, Sumitomo Corporations, Stanwell, Queensland Government, Korean Ministry of Trade, Industry and Energy, and much more to expect, to discuss the latest innovations and fill your business future by meaningful connections. As we all know, the Asia-Pacific region is emerging as a formidable force in green hydrogen sector, poised to secure nearly 55 market by 2030. At the forefront of this momentum, Australia, a key player in green hydrogen production and export within APAC, is actively collaborating with international partners to accelerate international trade initiative. Bringing together international policymakers and project stakeholders from Australia, Japan, South Korea, Southeast Asia, and Europe, this Impact webinar will not only provide you with an insightful overview of ongoing global collaborations, but also dive deeply into practical next steps aimed at enhancing and diversifying Australia and APAC's hydrogen supply chains, such as risk mitigation, expansion of global engagement, shaping the future of hydrogen on a global scale. And during this webinar, I also encourage all of you to actively engage in our discussion, ask thought-provoking insights, and together, let's chart a future-proof pathway that consolidates international hydrogen supply chains and capitalize on potential that lies within the rapidly evolving industry. And now, without further ado, I would like to invite our opening keynote speaker on stage, Mr. Roland Roesch, Director Innovations and Technology Center at the International Renewable Energy Agency. And he will provide us with an overview of prospects and challenges of global hydrogen market and key strategies of driving growth of hydrogen supply chains with international collaborations. Hi Roland, the floor is open for you right now. Welcome on stage.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to address this distinguished audience and represent IRENA, the International Renewable Energy Agency. With 169 member states, IRENA's mission is to promote international collaboration, support countries in their energy transitions, and provide cutting-edge data analysis in technology innovation, policy, finance, and investment. IRENA drives the widespread adoption and sustainable use of all forms of renewable energy, including bioenergy, geothermal, hydropower, ocean, and solar wind energy in the pursuit of sustainable development, energy access, and energy security for economic and social resilience and prosperity and a climate-proof future. My name is Roland Roesch. I'm the Director of IRENA's Innovation and Technology Center, IITC, in Bonn. At IITC, we work at the future role of green hydrogen in the energy sector. We are committed to understanding the requirements for scaling up global hydrogen deployment. Our flagship report, the World Energy Transition Outlook, sends a resounding message. The global energy transition is not on track. Current plans fall short of keeping the global temperature increase below 1.5 degrees. While there is progress in some areas, annual investments need to increase fourfold to align with our 1.5 degrees scenario. In our 1.5 degrees scenario for 2050, electricity takes the forefront, constituting over 50% of final energy consumption. This shift is driven by expanded renewable energy deployment, heightened energy efficiency, and the electrification of end-use sectors. As per our World Energy Transition Outlook 2023, hydrogen and e-fuels might represent 14% of total final energy consumption in this scenario, with 94% of it being renewable hydrogen. The growth necessitates an increase in electrolyzer capacity from 0.5 gigawatts today to 233 gigawatts by 2030 and a massive 5,700 gigawatts by 2050, requiring investments of 170 billion for green hydrogen and its derivatives. Hydrogen's pivotal role in the global energy transition lies in its ability to transport renewable electricity from regions rich in renewable energy to demand centers. By 2050, we will require over 20,000 terawatt hours of electricity for green hydrogen production, nearly matching our current global electricity consumption. This necessitates a supply increase to approximately 530 megatons per year in 2050, with electrolyzer capacity growing to about 5,700 gigawatts. This expansion will have significant implications for infrastructure investments, including generation technology, grid infrastructure, and enabling infrastructure such as EV charging, electrolyzers, pipelines, and digital solutions. Smart integration of electrolyzers into power systems and maximization of synergies with renewable generation is essential. We've highlighted the need for global efforts to meet the green hydrogen capacities required for the energy transition. Now let's focus on driving growth in global markets, which goes beyond massive investments. Price is a key factor to stimulate demand. In 2050, we project the levelized cost of hydrogen to be low, averaging less than 1.5 to 2 kilograms hydrogen in most countries per US dollar with optimal renewable resources. Regions like Sub-Sahara Africa, the Americas, West Asia, and Oceania possess the highest potential for low-cost hydrogen due to their abundant renewable resources. However, technical and economic potential alone isn't enough. Factors like water availability, local energy mix, existing infrastructure, political stability, business friendliness, and government support also play critical roles in achieving low-cost green hydrogen. So the technical potential for global hydrogen production is high. It is important to note that in our projection, only 25% of all globally consumed hydrogen would be traded internationally. Of this 25%, 55% would be traded via pipeline and 45% via ship. For the trade via ship, we accept the largest share to be traded in the form of ammonia without later reconversion to hydrogen. Another aspect driving the growth of the global market is innovation in trade. Innovation in this area is key to further drive global growth of the market. First, harmonization of carbon certification, balancing market growth and environmental integrity is an important aspect. For trade via ship, infrastructure, planning and development for maritime transportation is required. The important question here is what would be the respective hydrogen carrier? Is it ammonia, methanol, or LOHC to develop the infrastructure? Many ports around the world have already begun working on strategies but call for their governments on reliable regulation to take investment decisions. For pipeline trade, enhanced standards to ensure safety and performance are required. This brings me to a key topic of our current activities: quality infrastructure. Quality infrastructure consists of all activities which provide confidence that the technology will meet the expectations of consumers, investors, and other stakeholders, such as standards, metrology, testing, certification, inspection, accreditation, and quality management systems for the production and trade of green hydrogen. So quality infrastructure is crucial for green hydrogen development. One of the challenges for the deployment of green hydrogen is the perceived technical risk. The diffusion of green hydrogen-related technologies with poor quality and safety could undermine the sustainable energy transition. Operationalizing quality infrastructure can address this risk and at the same time spur technological improvement. A well-functioning quality infrastructure can attain quality assurance and generate confidence in the market about the conformity of green hydrogen products, processes, and services. Effective quality infrastructure can improve finance conditions, reduce regulatory and performance uncertainty, further reduce levelized cost of electricity, the LCOEs, and enhance trade and scalability of mini-grid markets. IRENA is developing a roadmap for the development of the quality infrastructure. IRENA will provide an analysis on the role of quality infrastructure services as an instrument for successful global production and use of green hydrogen and selected green hydrogen derivatives. In conclusion, the challenges to scale up hydrogen are global and require a significant level of global coordination. So what does this mean? Significant ramp-up and deployment of renewable generation through ambitious targets, incentives, and energy system design. Remove critical cost and regulatory barriers for production and deploy mechanisms to accelerate hydrogen demand. Focus on innovation and research and development to enable improvement on cost, efficiency and durability of the electrolyzer and de-risking of the technology steps for global hydrogen trade. Ensure clarity on standards both through a certification scheme and for development of assets across the value chain. Drive critical mass demand through major hydrogen projects, leveraging efficient allocation of capital, long-term certainty and sectoral targets for uptake. Ensure early ramp-up of infrastructure development, including transport, storage, conversion and reconversion facilities and repurposing of the existing natural gas infrastructure. Accelerate the scale-up of electrolyzer manufacturing and electrolyzer sizes, driving economies of scale. Thank you all for your time and for this opportunity. I wish you an insightful webinar. Thank you very much. With all the best, Roland Roesch, Director of the Innovation and Technology Center. Thank you.
Thank you, Roland, for your very informative sharing, and I think it's a really thought-provoking and insightful. And I do believe it's a well-established fact that international collaboration will be instrumental to harmonize, ensure environmental integrities, and create value opportunities in global sales and develop its robust green hydrogen market based on the quality infrastructure mentioned in your presentation. Australia and Korea has been actively collaborating on green hydrogen and steel production due to their shared interest in clean energy and sustainable development. The two nations have been exploring partnership and investment to develop the necessary infrastructure for producing, storing, and transporting green hydrogen. In the next keynote speech, Mr. James Choice, Honorary Ambassador of Foreign Investment Promotion for South Korea and Managing Director at J2 Adviso, will provide us with his guidance of Australia-Korea hydrogen intersection and collaborations of green hydrogen and steel, and Korean companies' active engagement in Australia's hydrogen export. And now let's welcome James.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak about Australia-Korea and the hydrogen cooperation opportunities. Next slide, please. I'd like to start with the overview of why Korea is focusing on hydrogen. It's because, as many other countries have, it's committed to net zero by 2050. It will seek to cut emissions by 40% by 2030.
Sorry, James. Sorry to interrupt you, but it seems like you didn't turn on your camera.
It's on.
Okay, all right. You can go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, it's on. I'll start with a policy in Korea that most people should be taking note of. It's the basic energy plan that is updated every 5 years and outlines Korea's ambition to change its energy mix. As you can see in this slide, Korea is decarbonizing. It's reducing its reliance on coal and LNG, but ramping up renewables. But also, most interestingly, it is looking at hydrogen and ammonia playing a much more important part in the energy mix. Next slide, please. And Korea is making a big bet on hydrogen. It was the world's second country in the world to issue a hydrogen roadmap. It was the first country in the world to implement a comprehensive range of hydrogen-related laws that will provide the basis of developing the hydrogen ecosystem. And in 2021, it launched the Hydrogen Economy Action Plan, which outlined concrete measures that it would implement to stimulate the hydrogen industry. Next slide. And Korea is seeking to become a global leader in the production and deployment of fuel cell electric vehicles. As you can see, it has ambitious targets to ramp up the numbers on Korean roads. It is also focusing on Korean heavy-duty vehicles, trucks, commercial vehicles to stimulate hydrogen demand. And underpinning all of this will be the rollout of domestic hydrogen refueling infrastructure, providing a network of stations, but also storage infrastructure that will underpin the hydrogen economy. For Australian participants, you should really take note of the use of hydrogen in Korea for power generation. As Korea phases out coal-fired power station, it is looking to co-fire ammonia, trying to reach a 20% blend by 2027-28, but also looking at injecting hydrogen in LNG-fired power stations. And by 2050, the aim is to retire all coal-fired power stations and transition to cleaner fuels such as hydrogen. Next slide. One of the most signature pieces of short-term policy making that will stimulate Korea's hydrogen industry is the Clean Hydrogen Portfolio Standard, or it could be easily termed the Compulsory Hydrogen Portfolio Standard, because it requires Korean electricity providers to supply clean hydrogen-based electricity. It is a mandatory percentage of offtake, which operates as an incentive to invest in hydrogen-based stationary power. And the prices and contracts are organized through a competitive bidding system. And next slide. The first bidding auction market was opened in Korea only a few months ago. The world's first. Next slide. Now, with all these policies and initiatives, Korea's hydrogen consumption is expected to grow dramatically. Some figures suggest it will be close to 30 million tonnes by 2050. Others are more ambitious, citing around about 50 million tonnes. But what is clear, though, is Korea has already missed some of its short-term targets. Korean companies and the Korean government will be the first to acknowledge that it's been hard. But what this strategy, though, underpins is Korea's ambition to ramp up the hydrogen economy. Next slide. And with the need to supply hydrogen to the Korean economy, Korean companies have actively started exploring opportunities here in Australia, because Korea needs to start importing hydrogen from overseas sources by 2030. We have had companies such as Samsung, CNT, actively exploring opportunities with Australian partners. We've had Arc Energy and its parent company, Korea Zinc, seeking to ramp up its renewable capacity based on its Townsville operations and seeking to work with Hanwha and SK to form a consortia that will lead to a hydrogen supply chain with Korea. We've also seen Korean generation companies such as KEPCO, East West Power, and Midlands Power laying the groundwork for hydrogen supply chain, actively engaging with partnerships with Korean and Australian companies here in Australia. Next slide. And as you can see from this anticipated future flow of hydrogen trade, most of Australia's hydrogen will be sent to South Korea and Japan, our main Northeast Asian trading partners. Korea is committed to making this supply chain work. And most significantly, it is noteworthy that Korea and Japan have recently indicated they will start cooperating with each other in developing a supply chain. I understand leaders of Korea and Japan will make an announcement at the upcoming APEC meeting in San Francisco. And it is that combined demand pull factor from Korea and Japan that will drive the development of Australia's hydrogen industry. Next slide. But I think it's a given that Australia's hydrogen industry is still at an early stage of development. It has one of the largest pipeline of projects in the world, but most of them are still well before FID and still need much more development. It is a fact that we will need more government support and assistance to kickstart the development of Australia's hydrogen industry. Next slide. And it is the US Inflation Reduction Act that has been the game changer. Its generous subsidies, tax credits have really drawn the attention away from Australia's hydrogen industry. And there's been significant competition from Middle East companies and countries as well. It's encouraging that Australia has launched a $2 billion hydrogen Head Start program to support Australia's hydrogen projects. But it is simply that. It's a good start. I think we need much more to develop Australia's hydrogen industry. Next slide. And we should be focusing on Australia's review of hydrogen strategy. And I think what we do need to see is much more government support, much more international collaboration and cooperation, and support for innovative technologies. But one of the dynamics we should be monitoring carefully is this split in Australia on whether hydrogen should be used for domestic use to start making green steel or processing industry here in Australia, or whether exports are the first place for focus. Wait and see. Next slide. Now, when you talk about hydrogen Korea, Australia, we have to start talking about green steel, because Australia exports coal and iron ore to Korea for use in Korea's blast furnaces for steel manufacturing. Steel currently makes up around about 10% of the world's emissions, but Korea is rapidly trying to transition to lower forms of carbon emission steelmaking. It is starting to look at hydrogen reduction as a technological solution to reduce emissions in steel industry. Next slide. And the signature project that we should be focusing on is POSCO's plans to develop a hot briquetted iron plant in Port Hedland. It is seeking to move some of the initial processing of iron ore here to Australia, close to the source of renewables and hydrogen, where hydrogen reduction would strip away the oxides and impurities of iron ore to create a more pure form of iron called hot briquetted iron, which you see a picture of on the far right corner of this slide. This project would potentially become, if it gets to FID and scales up, be one of the largest domestic off-takers of hydrogen here in Australia. It is an example of how hard-to-abate industries are going to start seeking renewable sources of energy and move closer to those sources. But this project, if it becomes feasible, will be an opportunity for Australia to become part of the green steel supply chain. Next slide. And it is encouraging. The Australian government has signalled that it will start supporting these industries. Australia's Treasurer, Jim Chalmers, announced just a few weeks ago that he will start looking at funding for key industries to start realising Australia's ambitions to be a green energy superpower focusing on battery manufacturing, renewable hydrogen, ammonia, and green metals and critical minerals. We look forward to further rollout of these measures early next year. Next slide. So in short, Korea and Australia are both early leaders in the development of the hydrogen economy, and establishing a hydrogen partnership will serve as a foundation for a new phase in the Australia-Korea economic partnership. And it is clear that Korean companies are making sizable commitments to developing a hydrogen industry. And trade and investment relationship will clearly be transformed as Australia and Korea both decarbonize. Thank you very much for this opportunity to provide an overview. I think there are many, many opportunities going forward to develop the hydrogen industry between Australia and Korea. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, James, for your kind sharing. I think that's a very solid presentation. And during your presentation, of course, we've received so many questions from our audience, and I'm sure they are seeking to have your answers. And as you mentioned, the IRA, which refers to Inflation Reduction Act in your presentation. So what do you think has been the impact of the IRA on Korea's hydrogen interest in Australia?
Well, as I mentioned, the IRA has had an impact. It's clearly the case that the attention has been drawn towards the United States because of the generous subsidies. But at the same time, I think Korean companies are playing the long game. There's an acknowledgement that Australia has abundant renewables. It has the land. It has all the natural advantages of supporting a hydrogen industry. It is also clearly the case that Korea is making a bet on Australia as well as being one of the key providers of hydrogen for Korea's future demand needs. There's also an assessment that the ramping up of US IRA and US's hydrogen industry will lead to much of that hydrogen being used in the United States first and foremost. So for Korea's hydrogen security and energy needs, it's probably most likely going to be the case that Korea will start making more bets on other countries, including Australia, to source that hydrogen it needs into the future.
Thank you, James. So to have further discussion, what further governmental measures do you think are required to make hydrogen supply chain a reality?
As I mentioned, I think it requires further government support to de-risk the early stages of hydrogen industry, both in Korea, and I think the Korean government acknowledges it needs to do more to stimulate the demand and create the ecosystem within Korea itself. But at the same time, we need more measures here in Australia to support and de-risk Australia's hydrogen projects. As I mentioned, the Hydrogen Head Start, the $2 billion program initiated by the Australian government, is a good start, but many more measures are required. As a secondary point on Australian measures, I think Australia really starts to need to simplify the approvals process of getting hydrogen projects up and running. I think the constant refrain from Korean companies engaging Australian hydrogen projects is that it takes way too long to get approvals done. So they look forward to simplification of those approvals processes here in Australia.
Thank you, James, and thanks again for all of your detailed answers and participation in the Korea chapter. And I think with significant support provided by both Korean and Australian government, more collaborations, including research initiative, pilot project, and investments in technology and infrastructure will further facilitate the large-scale production of green hydrogen and its application in steel manufacturing, serving as a foundation for new phase in Australia-Korea economic partnership. As we all know, Singapore has been positioning itself as a key player in global push towards hydrogen transport and the marine decarbonization due to its strategic location, strong maritime industry, and commitment to sustainability. In the next keynote speech, we are honored to have Mr. Alexander Cox, Australian High Commissioner to Singapore, and he will shed light on the collaboration of global hydrogen transport and the marine decarbonization between Australia and Singapore. And Mr. Cox has specially prepared a video for his session. So Mr. Cox, welcome on stage.
Effective collaboration is essential to achieving our energy transition goals, so events like this play an important role in aligning global efforts. I'm sorry I can't be with you joining you live, but I'm glad that I'm still able to take part. The shift to clean energy represents an enormous global challenge and an opportunity for Australia to step up to ensure the future energy security of our trading partners in Asia, while ensuring our own future prosperity and economic resilience. The maritime sector will be particularly difficult to abate. In July 2023, the International Maritime Organization, IMO, the United Nations regulatory body for shipping, adopted a revised greenhouse gas strategy which aims for international shipping to reach zero emissions by or close to 2050 to align the industry with the objectives of the Paris Climate Agreement. The question now is, how do we get there? Like much of the decarbonisation agenda, no country can do it alone. Collaboration and partnership will be crucial, and Australia and Singapore are well placed to lead the way and provide a model for others to follow. First, let me provide an overview of Australia's efforts to drive innovation and investment in future fuels before speaking to the pathfinding Singapore-Australia Green Economy Agreement and our latest initiative to develop a green and digital shipping corridor. Australia wants to position itself as a renewable energy superpower. We know global capital is shifting ever more rapidly towards clean energy and net zero aligned projects. The IEA forecasts that global investment in clean energy is on course to rise to $1.7 trillion this year, with investment in solar set to eclipse oil production for the first time. Innovation and investment are driving towards a new era of low-cost renewable energy that can improve competitiveness for traditional and emerging industries. World markets are increasingly demanding low-emission energy and materials. Australia's abundant sun, wind and large landmass give us a unique advantage in generating clean power more cheaply than other nations. Sound and consistent energy policy is crucial to ensuring that the transition is responsibly managed, bringing new resources of renewable energy and technology into the mix, while ensuring reliable, affordable power for households and businesses. The Australian Government has implemented important changes to Australia's energy and climate policy settings over the past 12 months to address key challenges, responding to high energy prices and seeking an ambitious 2030 emissions reduction and 2050 net zero set of targets. In the last year, the Australian Government joined many other nations which have increased their emissions reduction targets, committing to a 43% reduction on 2005 levels by 2030, and we have reaffirmed our commitment to reach net zero emissions by 2050. Australia's clean energy transition is crucial for reducing our emissions to meet our ambitious targets and to address climate change. Our transition will need to be at a fast but steady pace, and there are many opportunities to cooperate on developing clean energy industries where hydrogen will play a key role. Clean hydrogen, produced with a minimal carbon footprint, is well positioned to play a key role in our decarbonisation goals, and Australia is well positioned to be a leader in the global hydrogen industry, and this is something people here in Singapore are very interested in. We are already seeing that global demand for renewable hydrogen is growing rapidly and is projected to reach around 500 million tonnes per year by 2050. Australia has an estimated $300 billion Australian pipeline of proposed hydrogen projects, over 100 projects in clean hydrogen, ammonia and green methanol, accounting for 40% of all announced hydrogen projects globally. Australian governments at both state and federal levels have provided about 40 billion Australian dollars in funding support support to seed the Australian hydrogen industry. The Australian Federal Government in Canberra has committed over $4 billion Australian dollars to support the development of a clean hydrogen industry, including through the new $2 billion Hydrogen Head Start program, which opened for expressions of interest in October 2023. Hydrogen Head Start bridges the commercial gap projects, putting renewable hydrogen on a path to scale and supporting future export and manufacturing opportunities. The government has invested over $500 million for hydrogen hubs in regional Australia and more than $38 million to develop a Guarantee of Origin scheme to certify clean hydrogen projects. It is also currently reviewing policy options to reduce carbon leakage, including an Australian carbon border adjustment mechanism, in particular for hard-to-abate industries such as steel and cement. But of course, reducing our own emissions will not be enough. Australia will need to work with our partners to support global efforts to reduce emissions and support stable and reliable clean energy markets. This is exactly what we are doing with Singapore through our Green Economy Agreement. Australia and Singapore have a strong and vibrant relationship. Australia was the second country to recognise Singapore when it became independent in 1965. In 2015, Australia and Singapore established a Comprehensive Strategic Partnership, CSP, which encompasses all aspects of our relationship, including trade, defence, science and innovation, education and the arts, digital economy and green economy. Singapore is Australia's largest two-way trading partner and investor in Southeast Asia. Singapore-Australia Free Trade Agreement, SAFTA, which was signed in 2003, was updated in 2015. Australia, like Singapore, has set ambitious targets and goals for decarbonising its economy and reducing its greenhouse gas emissions. As a major supplier of LNG to Singapore, Australia has been a long-standing energy partner. As we transition our economies to net zero, we will continue to work closely with our partners like Singapore to ensure regional energy security. We also want to reach our ambitious targets and continue to lead in the implementation of these goals. This will mean a fundamental change in the composition and dynamics of our trade and investment relationship as our economies transition to low and zero emissions energy sources. Oil and gas will need to be transitioned to clean transportable fuels like ammonia and hydrogen. This transition will come with costs, but will also create opportunities. Australia and Singaporean businesses are already taking advantage of these opportunities. Innovative companies like Australia's Hysata, which has developed the world's most efficient electrolyzers, and Singapore's Keppel, which is involved in a range of Australian clean energy projects, are at the forefront of the energy transition. Just over a year ago, on the 18th of October 2022, the Australian and Singaporean governments signed the Singapore-Australia Green Economy Agreement, the GEA. The GEA lays the foundations for greater collaboration between our two countries to drive growth while reducing emissions. It's a new type of agreement which combines trade, economic and climate objectives by promoting deeper collaboration between our governments and business communities, and it seeks to boost trade and create business opportunities and decarbonise key industrial sectors. Under the GEA, Australia and Singapore are promoting trade in environmental goods and services. We are fostering business collaboration, including through a Go Green Co-Innovation Grants program to encourage Australian and Singapore SMEs to work together to foster green innovations. We are promoting sustainable finance and green investment. We're sharing insights into policies and programs that build green skills and a green workforce. and we are increasing the compatibility of standards to facilitate trade. The GEA builds on the excellent cooperation that's been established between Australia's Commonwealth Scientific and Industrial Research Organisation, CSIRO, and its equivalent, the Singaporean A*STAR, and the Maritime and Ports Authority of Singapore. One of the key challenges the GEA seeks to tackle is maritime decarbonisation. Accounting for over 90% of global trade volume, the maritime sector is regarded as the global economy's backbone. Shipping remains, in most cases, the most efficient and cost-effective way to carry goods long distances, but it also accounts for approximately 1/4 of all emissions from the global transport sector and around 3% of total global emissions overall, emitting nearly 1 billion tonnes of CO2 per year. If the international shipping sector were a country, it would be the 6th or 7th largest CO2 emitter, comparable to Germany. The shipping industry faces intense pressure to decarbonise in the coming decades. As I noted earlier, in July this year, the IMO agreed to zero emissions by or close to 2050 to align the industry with the objectives of the Paris Climate Agreement. But cutting the emissions of such a complex industry is no simple task. To reach the IMO targets and beyond, a multifaceted approach is needed. Maximising energy efficiency will be important. Renewable energy, such as wind and solar, will also be key. So too will the development of new technologies and the leveraging of hydrogen and hydrogen derivatives, particularly ammonia and methanol, to be used as bunker fuels. The International Renewable Energy Agency estimates renewable ammonia could represent as much as 43% of shipping fuel by 2050. Despite private and public interest in decarbonisation, international shipping currently uses virtually no low-carbon fuels, instead relying on carbon-dense bunker fuel. To reach the IMO goals, industry leaders say that the first net zero ships must enter the global fleet by 2030. Therefore, it's imperative to explore low-carbon fuel alternatives now to prepare for the impending energy transition in coming decades. Powering vessels is one element, but there is a much broader range of elements that will need to be decarbonised in the maritime sector. For example, ports are the hub where land and sea join, meaning many industries intersect. Replacing all port and harbour activities with renewable energies would have a massive impact on carbon emissions in the maritime sector. This complex and difficult task will require key industry players and governments to cooperate. Singapore is, of course, a key country in this agenda. Singapore is a global hub port, linked to 600 ports in 120 countries and attracting 130,000 vessel calls on average each year. With this depth of activity, it's no wonder Singapore has made itself the world's largest fuel bunkering hub. It is a global ports epicentre. Singapore's strategic location, long trading history and strong connections into Asian markets have long made it an attractive place for maritime companies and businesses. This is one of Singapore's key strengths, its ability to bring together a wide array of stakeholders to work together on a maritime decarbonisation agenda. For example, there is important work being done by Singapore's Global Centre for Maritime Decarbonisation, GCMD, which is working with Australian partners, including industry partners, on groundbreaking research into ammonia bunkering and safe management of ammonia in shipping. Australia is proud to be working with Singapore through the GEA and other instruments to leverage our complementary strengths on the maritime decarbonisation agenda. when Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese met with Singapore's acting Prime Minister Lawrence Wong in June this year, they announced an initiative under the GEA to establish a green and digital shipping corridor by 2025. Our Green Shipping Corporation seeks to establish government, business and research partnerships to explore decarbonisation of operations at sea and at ports, assessment of shipping routes, alternative fuel use and bunkering, and infrastructure requirements. As we establish this green and digital shipping corridor, we will seek to pilot and trial the use of low-emission shipping fuels and bunkering facilities. This is an ambitious frontier of cooperation, but we are confident both Australia and Singapore can offer the complementary strengths needed to make meaningful progress on maritime decarbonisation. Australia is an island continent with a long history of shipping and port operations. We're also committed to harnessing Australia's vast solar and wind resources to continue our role as an energy security partner for this region. This aligns perfectly with Singapore's strength as a global maritime hub with an ambitious and innovative decarbonisation agenda. We admire Singapore's ambition and its implementation of climate goals through work, including by the Maritime and Ports Authority, on hydrogen and hydrogen-based fuels like ammonia. We welcome the investment from Singaporean companies like Keppel and the collaborative work that is already going on between our private sectors. We see the GEA as a landmark agreement that we hope will form a model for the kind of comprehensive cooperation agreements that the world will need to address the enormous challenge of the energy transition. Wouldn't it be fantastic and fitting if the first offtake agreements for Australian green hydrogen-based fuels were with Singapore? Thank you for your attention.
I also think both Australia and Singapore will continue to be active participants in the global efforts to promote hydrogen as a clean energy source, and their collaborations holds promise for leveraging each other's strengths in this field. Besides Singapore, Australia and Japan have also been engaging in collaborations efforts focusing on hydrogen due to Japan's commitment to achieving carbon neutrality and Australia's potential as a significant exporter of hydrogen, particularly green hydrogen derived from renewable resources. In our next Japan chapter, two distinguished speakers from both public and private sector will be joining us and share us with the latest policy updates and featured project proceedings. So first of all, let's introduce Mr. Trevor Holloway, Australian Consul General in Osaka and Senior Trade Commissioner at the Australian Trade and Investment Commission. And he will deliver a speech on facilitating partnership between Australia and Japan to consolidate Australia's hydrogen supply chain. So Mr. Holloway, welcome on stage.
Thanks, Holman, and hello, everyone. My name is Trevor Holloway. I'm a Senior Trade Commissioner for Austrade in Japan and Australia's Consul General in Osaka. I'll just see if I can start my presentation. How's that? Can you see it okay?
Yeah, we can see it's now in full display.
Might just take a minute. Okay. Look, first, I'll just, I think mainly for our non-Australian companies joining the call today, let me make a few just short comments on Australia's attractiveness as a destination for foreign capital and for
Trevor, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but it seems like your slides are still not in full display. Actually, switch to.
Showing on my screen. Do you want to share it from your side, Holman?
Okay, sure. We'll share your slides from our side.
Yep, that's it. Great, thank you. On the next slide. Yeah, so just a few comments on Australia's attractiveness as a destination. We are the world's 12th largest economy, one of only 9 countries to be rated AAA by all 3 major credit rating agencies. Australia is rated in the global top 20 for ease of doing business, and we enjoy good governance, strong institutions, and the rule of law, which all lead to low sovereign risk. And our cultural diversity and multilingual community, with 28% of Australians born overseas, helps give us just those great regional connections. Next slide, please. Our energy story is pretty well known, and also is our very clear ambition to become a renewable energy superpower. From a Japanese perspective, there's a lot of interest in the advantages that Australia has for producing hydrogen, such as our abundant land with access to particularly high capacity solar and wind resources, and having strong existing energy infrastructure. Next slide, thanks. One of the other key advantages Australia enjoys is proximity to future markets. 12 of our 15 export markets are in Asia and Oceania, and we have a network of 18 free trade agreements covering all the major economies in the region. So we are well placed to supply hydrogen in the future through this proximity to market, our established energy trade links, and relatively lower shipping costs. Next slide, thanks. Again, I think the low cost of renewables is reasonably well known, so I won't go into too much detail, other than to say that the projected falls in the cost of solar generation and onshore wind generation in Australia will continue to keep us in a competitive position compared to other producers. Next slide, thanks. This slide looks just briefly at how we are developing our hydrogen industry. Some of the other speakers have touched on this already, so I won't go into too much detail. Just to say that our Australia's first national hydrogen strategy, released in 2019, was really informed by Japan's own hydrogen strategy, the first one released in the world in late 2017. Next slide, thanks. James Choi mentioned some of the earlier support measures by the Australian government, but the Japanese investors we speak with really are interested in looking at support measures available, including most recently the $2 billion Hydrogen Head Start program, which is supporting large-scale projects through providing production credits to cover that gap between the production cost of green hydrogen and its market price. Next slide, thanks. And we receive a lot of queries from Japan about Australia's Hydrogen Hubs program, where the Australian government has invested more than $500 million to support the development of hubs in regional areas. There are 11 hubs shown on this map that have been funded by the Australian federal government or state and territory government. Next slide, thanks. Turning to our international partnerships, including with Japan, this slide shows the 7 formal partnerships Australia has with other countries. Again, the previous speakers have talked about our engagement with Singapore and with Korea, and our focus on collaboration with others to attract investment, to build supply chains, and to advance R&D. But our hydrogen relationship with Japan is a real standout, helped by our very strong economic complementarities, a close strategic and political relationship, and very similar ambitions in our emissions reduction commitment. As I noted earlier, Australia's ambition is to become a renewable energy superpower, and we see Japan as being central to helping realise that ambition. Japan is already Australia's most important energy partner, and we are Japan's single largest provider of energy. And Japan, of course, has been a foundational investor and off-taker for Australia's traditional energy and resources sector for the last 60 years. So we see Japan as having a major role in the hydrogen supply chain in Australia, with Japanese corporates partnering with Australian and other country partners to replicate the scale of investment and the scale of offtake that we saw for the LNG supply chain, for example, as well as to support the kind of innovation required for future hydrogen trade that again we saw in the LNG sector. For example, innovation around LNG contracts and LNG carrier vessels. Next slide, thanks. And Japanese corporates had already been first movers in Australia. This map shows 13 hydrogen-related projects under development or under construction in Australia that have Japanese participation. And there are quite a few others at earlier stages of development. The first of these was the HESC project that I'm sure many people are familiar with. The pilot project was completed in February last year with a trial delivery of liquefied hydrogen to Corbair, and it's now in the commercial demonstration phase, championed by KHI with support from J-Power, Sumitomo, Iwatani, Shell Japan and others, as well as with support from the Australian, Japanese and Victorian governments. And I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that the HESC project showed us that a hydrogen supply chain between Australia and Japan was not only technically feasible, but was indeed the logical next step in Australia's energy partnership with Japan. And this project has really laid the groundwork for the next wave of commercial hydrogen developments in Australia. One of the characteristics of Japanese involvement in Australia's hydrogen sector is the diversity of approaches being rolled out, not being tied to a specific colour, but looking for the best local fit in each location and taking advantage of existing infrastructure where that's applicable. The details on this map were cross-referenced from CSIRO's High Resource, which is a great one-stop shop web portal developed and managed by the CSIRO to help inform the market about hydrogen developments. It might be a little bit hard to see some of the detail in this figure, but there are projects using a variety of production technologies, including solar, wind, hydro, natural gas, and brown coal with CCS. And let me point out another particular project, the Central Queensland Hydrogen Project in Gladstone in Queensland, the CQH2 project that's currently at the feed stage and also received significant funding from both the federal and the Queensland governments. The project is Queensland's largest renewable hydrogen project and ranks in the global top 10, with Central Queensland as the hub of the strategic development. And being led by Stanwell in partnership with Iwatani, Kansai Electric, Marubeni and Keppel Infrastructure. Next slide, thank you. Another characteristic of commercial cooperation between Australia and Japan on hydrogen supply chains has been the strong level of government support on both sides. I've mentioned the funding for the HESC project and the Hydrogen Head Start program and the regional hubs is just a few examples. But government-to-government policy engagement has also been important in sharing lessons learned and identifying potential obstacles in the way of industry. And our bilateral engagement with Japan is continuing to evolve, with the Australia-Japan Partnership on Decarbonisation through Technology, focusing on promoting clean energy development. Most recently, when Japanese METI Minister Nishimura visited Australia last month, our two countries agreed to work towards an enhanced partnership on energy security, transition and climate change, to focus further on achieving our respective net zero goals across a broader range of sectors. And ministers also recognised the importance of working together on mutual recognition of carbon intensity-based hydrogen certification schemes in order to help accelerate clean hydrogen trade. And to help Australian and Japanese companies further explore the commercial opportunities, a couple of months ago, we hosted a Decarbonising Australia Business Summit in Sydney, which I'm sure a few people on the call attended. There was very strong participation from Japan, with about 90 company representatives attending, which was another real indication of the high level of bilateral interest in hydrogen and ammonia, in CCS, in SAF, sustainable aviation fuel, green steel, and other related topics. And we find that events like the Decarbonising Summit also help to inform government about the future sectors or issues of commercial opportunity. These include areas like e-methane production from green hydrogen, which again has the potential to utilise the huge amount of existing LNG infrastructure for export. And the last characteristic of commercial cooperation between Australia and Japan that I'll mention is the opportunity to partner up to help supply third markets. And we're already seeing some great examples of this. For example, in South Australia, Marubeni and Lavo and others are working together on a green hydrogen project to use metal hydride containers to supply Indonesia. And in Queensland, Thorjits and CF Energy and others are working on a solar hydrogen pilot project to supply Palau. Next slide, thanks. So just a short summary of the scale of opportunities in hydrogen in Australia, with over 115 active projects, accounting for about 40% of the world's renewable hydrogen project pipeline, and with one of the world's largest pipelines of announced hydrogen projects valued at between $230 and $300 billion. And we want to see that pipeline reach FID and become reality. Next slide, thanks. Let me just finish with a quick plug for Austrade. We are the Australian Federal Government's Trade and Investment Promotion Agency, and one of our key roles is to connect Australian business to the world and the world to Australian business and opportunity. So we'd love to hear from you if you need some support or information about opportunities between Australia and Japan. Thank you, and let me pass back to Holman.
Thank you, Trevor, for your kind sharing of the strong government-to-government framework of the green hydrogen partnership between Australia and Japan. And during your presentation, we've already received so many questions from our audience. We're sticking to have your answers. So first of all, Trevor, do you see any trends in Japanese preference for the hydrogen production technologies or hydrogen color in the Australian projects?
Yeah, thanks, Holman. We see a lot of focus on the carbon intensity of hydrogen projects rather than the colour descriptors as such. There's also a lot of interest in Australia's work to develop a guarantee of origin scheme to address this issue, to track and verify emissions associated with hydrogen and renewable energy. And I think Japan sees that as really important to help provide investors and the end consumers with the confidence about where a product has come from and how it was made and something about its life cycle carbon intensity. I think also the proof was in the map I showed, the 13 hydrogen-related projects in Australia with Japanese participation. It really is quite a broad church of different technologies being used in different areas across the different production technologies. So I think Japan's taking very much a look at everything that's available and seeing what works in particular circumstances.
Thank you, Trevor. There looks to be a really solid base of project under the development already. So how do you expect bilateral cooperation between Australia and Japan on hydrogen to develop over the next 5 years?
Yeah, it's interesting. If we look back, I guess, first, it's taken about 10 years for corporate Japan to get to the stage where we are at now, to develop confidence in that hydrogen supply chain between Australia and Japan. And I think Jeremy, the next speaker, will talk about that in a bit more detail. But I think looking forward, we see this real diversification in different hydrogen supply chains emerging. So if you look forward in 5 years, or say 2030, and we look back, I think we'll see that there'll be a range of major projects will be operational. There'll be a range of different supply and offtake agreements in place, and trade in hydrogen and the derivative products between Australia and Japan will really become quite normal, and starting to approach what I mentioned earlier about the trade in traditional energy products. In LNG, for example, there's just over one LNG carrier a day leaving Australia's projects towards Japan, and I think you'll start to see that similar kind of normalised trade in hydrogen products and derivatives from 2030 onwards.
Thank you, Trevor. Thanks again for your generous answers. And we do believe that the ongoing collaboration will greatly leverage Australia's renewable energy resources and Japan's technological expertise and market demand, accelerating the development and adoption of hydrogen as a clean energy solution. And now, without further ado, let me introduce our second speaker for the Japan chapter of today's webinar. Let's welcome Mr. Jeremy Stone, Non-Executive Director and Advisor of J-Power. Jeremy will share us with his insights into the commercialization of liquefied green hydrogen between Australia and Japan based on successful experience of the featured HESC project in Victoria, Australia. So Jeremy, please start your presentation.
Thank you very much, Roland. I'll just bring my presentation up. Okay, do you see that on full screen?
Yes, it's in full.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Well, thank you everyone for your attention and participating this afternoon. I'll give a brief 10-minute overview of our hydrogen energy supply chain project. As mentioned by Trevor, this has been around for 10 years. And so I'll just give a little bit of a summary of what we've done, what we've learned, and what the next steps are. I represent one of the organizations involved in this project, J-Power, a large Japanese utility company, energy company, 25 gigawatts of generation capacity around the world, 50% renewable in Japan. We invest in a whole range of clean energy technologies around the world, and have been very happy to be involved in this world's first liquid hydrogen supply chain project in Victoria. The project first started about 10 years ago, and the main reason is that Japan have a vision of net zero by 2050, but at the moment they import around about 90% of their energy as a fossil fuel. So as a result, to decarbonize, they needed to import other forms of clean energy, but also to increase their renewable energy opportunities in Japan. In fact, Japan was the first country which developed a national hydrogen strategy, and that was released in 2017. So last February, we completed our $500 million pilot project, which successfully developed a complete supply chain from hydrogen production in Latrobe Valley, Victoria, all the way through to liquefaction at the Port of Hastings, onto a world's first liquid hydrogen carrier, the Suiso Frontier, and then ship it and unload it at the Port of Kobe. In March of this year, we were pleased to receive the confidence of the Japanese government in receiving a $2.35 billion grant to take it from the pilot stage to what we call commercial demonstration stage. That money was coming from the Green Innovation Fund of Japan. And basically that involves a 40,000 tonne per annum project, around about 30,000 tonnes to be liquefied and exported to Japan, and 10,000 tonnes to be used domestically in Victoria to decarbonise Victoria. And there are now two consortia which have been established to implement this project. The hydrogen production and carbon capture and storage is the responsibility of a joint venture between J-Power and Sumitomo Corporation. And the liquefaction and shipping of that hydrogen to Japan is the responsibility of Japan Suiso Energy, which is a joint venture between Kawasaki Heavy Industries and Iwatani Corporation. The supply chain for the commercial demonstration project you'll see on screen now. So from left to right, we've got the gasification, whereby we will extract, through gasification, high temperature and pressure, we will extract the hydrogen out of the Latrobe Valley coal. We will then refine it, capture the CO2, and store that CO2 in one of two choices. One is the carbon sequestration project, or ExxonMobil Woodside carbon sequestration project. I'll talk a little bit more about that later. We will then liquefy that at the Port of Hastings, ship it, and in this instance now we will unload and use that and in Kawasaki City, the Port of Kawasaki City. So we often talk about why would you, if we can produce hydrogen, clean hydrogen from renewable sources, why would you do it through other forms such as steam methane reforming with carbon capture and storage, or through coal gasification with carbon capture and storage? And there's three main reasons: urgent emissions reduction, the scale of the challenge, and the benefits to the local economy. So at full scale, our project would save around about 1.8 million tonnes of CO2 going into the atmosphere, which is roughly the equivalent of the emissions of around 350,000 petrol-driven vehicles. So a very positive contribution to reducing CO2 emissions. The second reason is scale. The scale of our decarbonised challenge is massive, and we're seeing from many noted speakers and industry leaders and governments that we need to do everything everywhere, everything all at once. There's a quote there you see there. So this is the challenge we have, and we're trying to move away from ideology now into pragmatic decisions which have impact. Now, there's a lot of numbers on the screen. You don't have to really focus too much on the numbers, but just to give you a sense of the scale of the challenge, there's about 90 million tonnes of hydrogen produced right now without any carbon abatement. This is happening around the world, unabated, releasing about 1 gigatonne of CO2 into the atmosphere. And currently out of that, there's only 40,000 tonnes per annum, which is deemed clean. So just to produce the amount of hydrogen we produce now around the world, we need 2,250 of our projects, which is extraordinarily high, and it would take a lot of human resources and financial resources and material resources as well. The challenge is there's around about 680 projects, large-scale projects, hydrogen projects, which have been announced, but only less than 10% have reached FID, final investment decision. And even if all of them were to proceed, that would only produce around 24 million tonnes, well below the 90 million tonnes we produce now, and also below the 100 million tonnes IEA believes we need to have by 2030. So you can see it's a very, very large challenge. We need to be doing everything. We think our project will assist. And I mentioned the other thing is, what does it deliver locally? In Latrobe Valley, all the coal-fired power stations are progressively being shut down. So we see this as a new clean energy production opportunity to bring those workers from the current and previously focused coal-fired power stations into a range of new clean energy technologies. And it's not just about producing clean hydrogen. Through our form of process, we can produce other clean chemicals such as clean methanol, clean jet fuel, clean ammonia, and also clean fertilizer. Now, talking about clean hydrogen, and Trevor mentioned before about the Guarantee of Origin scheme, what we're seeing now is customers are moving away from the colour coding into carbon intensity. And carbon intensity is the kilos of CO2 per kilo of hydrogen. And the reason why that's important is because a customer, an end user, with that number, is then able to determine what their own carbon reduction is. A colour does not give them that opportunity. It gives them a little bit of information, but doesn't give them the number to calculate their carbon reduction, which is what they need. So we're seeing customers are wanting now a variety of carbon intensities at different price points. And the analogy would be going into a petrol station now, choosing either 98, 95 or 91 fuel based upon your engine needs, but also your price point. And that's where we're seeing. And the beauty about carbon intensity is we now have Australia's Guarantee of Origin scheme, which will develop the actual credible and transparent approach to determining what the carbon intensities are. And to give you a sense of the carbon intensities, on the left-hand side, 11.5 is roughly the carbon intensity right now of unabated hydrogen production. And then we've got on the right-hand side a variety of carbon intensities. So in the USA, if it's less than 4 kilos, you have access into the IRA rebate. If it's less than 3.4 in Japan, it's deemed as clean hydrogen. That's the same in EU at 3.4. In India, they've decided that green hydrogen is less than 2 kilos, and the Green Hydrogen Organization says that it's green hydrogen if it's less than 1 kilo. So not necessarily zero is renewable or green, but at the end of the day, again, customers are deciding now carbon intensity and price point. In terms of carbon capture and storage, again, that has been talked about much. The reality is it's a much needed requirement to decarbonize our society. IEA, IPCC support it. There's more than 300 CCS projects in development around the world, and 35 have already been built over the last 45 years. So well known and a critical part of our decarbonisation. Where our project is being built, we're lucky to have a number of carbon sequestration options available to us. One is the CarbonNet project that has been in development for 10 years. And the other is ExxonMobil Woodside joint venture project, where they would use depleted oil and gas reservoirs in Bass Strait and effectively reverse engineer using existing infrastructure. They would be able to, rather than extract gas out of their reservoirs, they would be able to inject in CO2, so keeping it safe there as it has for millions of years. So just wrapping up, we believe there's so much to do around the world. There's in terms of decarbonisation, trying to focus on a project by project basis is critical. We see the opportunity for our project is leveraging the pilot learnings from the pilot phase, but being an emissions reduction project, it's positive action now, and it's going to provide great transition jobs for the people in Gippsland. So we sort of see this as the right project in the right location at the right time. And with that, I'd like to thank you for your attention. Always happy to receive questions or emails, or to be connected through LinkedIn. And over to you, Roland, for Q&A.
Thank you, Jeremy. I very much appreciate your impressive presentation on key consideration of the liquefied green hydrogen between Australia and Japan, and J-Power's great practice in this field. And of course, during the presentation, some of our audience have proposed some questions. So first of all, as you mentioned, CCS is a major part of the featured HESC project. So could you please provide us with some background on the use of CCS for coal gasification and the carbon intensity of hydrogen?
Yeah, so this project has to achieve the carbon intensity of our customers, and the only way we can do that is with carbon capture and storage, or carbon capture utilization and storage in actual fact. So J-Power will be responsible for the carbon capture. We have a facility in Japan called Osaki Coolgen, which is effectively the same size as our first stage development, around about 40,000 tonnes per annum of hydrogen, which has been in operation since 2017. So it's gasification and carbon capture. So we have the evidence there that carbon capture would work as part of coal gasification. And the carbon sequestration, again, carbon sequestration has been around for decades, and we have the opportunity in Gippsland to choose between one of two options, and we will choose the best in terms of technical suitability for us, as well as the best commercial terms. It's also worthwhile noting that in the pilot, we also mixed in biomass. So we had a mixture of biomass and coal, for which we extracted out the hydrogen. And that biomass provides carbon neutral CO2. So if we inject that underground and store it, that becomes carbon negative. Or if we use that CO2 for other purposes, that's carbon neutral CO2. So if we were to combine our hydrogen with that CO2, it's carbon neutral methanol, or carbon neutral jet fuel, or carbon neutral ammonia or fertilizer. So quite a variety and diversity of opportunities, clean energy opportunities we have in Gippsland with CCS.
Thank you, Jeremy, for your very informative sharing and generous answers to all of these questions. And I personally can't wait to witness more collaborative pilot project and investments between Australia and Japanese company and the governments focusing on establishing the necessary infrastructure for hydrogen production, storage, and transportation. Australia aims to become a leading exporter of green hydrogen, and Germany's interest in hydrogen imports align with its commitment to reducing dependence on fossil fuel. In the next keynote speech, Ms. Florence Lindhaus, the head of hydrogen of Germany Australian Chamber of Industry and Commerce, will deliver a speech on streamlining Australia-Germany hydrogen trade. What should be prioritized? So Florence, welcome on stage.
And thank you very much for inviting me to speak. But according to Jeremy's presentation, and I fully agree to what he said about the color coding, you may have to change the name of your organization. It's not connecting green hydrogen anymore, but connecting low carbon or something along those lines. Now, just by way of introduction, I'm Florence Lindhaus. I'm the head of hydrogen of the German Chamber of Commerce. What does the Chamber of Commerce do? We're kind of the spider in the web, or I don't know, in the hub of pretty much all German, Australian bilateral initiatives, some of which you may know. For example, High Supply, which found out about the transport costs of Australian hydrogen to Europe. I'm going to talk about this a little bit later. And sometimes we receive German companies in Australia for who we look for Australian business partners. Many of you may have attended events organized by the Australia-Germany Energy Partnership or by our own German-Australian Hydrogen Alliance. The German-Australian Hydrogen Alliance is actually something that the German Chamber founded back in 2020. We have Deutsche Bank as a presenting partner, and together we try to streamline the German-Australian trade sector of hydrogen, providing events and informations. Also this year we submitted a submission to the National Hydrogen Strategy Update, and so membership is free just to receive that kind of information, and this is giving you a quick snapshot of members we have. Moving on from here, what are we talking about? Where does Germany stand? Germany currently has a demand of 1.5 tons of hydrogen, which is going to grow to 4 million tons. That was recently upgraded in 2030. By this time, Germany wants to have its own electrolysis capacity of 10 gigawatts. Germany is fully aware it's going to have to import roughly about 80% of its hydrogen demand. And that ties in with the European framework, which is aiming for 10 million tons of European hydrogen production by 2030 and 10 million tons of imports. Now, why is Australia an interesting partner for Germany? For one, Germany is capable of producing 27 times the amount of renewable energy it needs itself. And just 3% of its landmass covered with solar would be enough to cover 10 times the German energy demand per year. So the capacities are enormous, but in addition, Australia also has the infrastructure with the ports, etc., and the skills, and also just the mindset, and is therefore in a good position to export great amounts of energy. But something that should not be underestimated is, especially in this day and age, how Germany and Australia have been entertaining diplomatic relationships for the last 70 years and are therefore value partners. And if you look around Germany, I didn't provide a map for that, but you can all localize where that is. There are not a whole lot of countries with the same sort of renewable energy capacities in the near vicinity that do share that kind of value partnership. So therefore, for the last 10 years at least, both countries have been working on official partnerships. The current Australia-Germany energy partnership, for example, dates back to similar partnerships from 10 years ago. And they have culminated in this official energy partnership, which Germany has with other countries as well. And this is soon to be upgraded into a climate partnership. So we'll wait for that. I have already mentioned High Supply. That was a measure funded by both governments already 3 years ago, where it was decided, or they found out that the transport costs for hydrogen as ammonia from Australia to Europe was negligible, and how that was feasible. That's actually a great piece of work, and you can look up the report. We signed the Hydrogen Accord, both countries together, which entailed the Highgate funding, which I'm going to talk about on the next slide. And you will have heard of H2 Global, which is a reverse auction scheme for green hydrogen. Happy to talk more about it later. Then there are other measures, but one of them is a pretty recent one. That's a trilateral one called Tri-Hub, involving the Netherlands. Highgate, as I said, that was a beautiful funding mechanism where a German and an Australian partner had to team up, and at least one partner had to be academic. So there was usually more than the two that we named. and they were able to receive funding both from Germany and Australia, and that these were the winners so far. But other than academic partnerships or more research-based, we have been seeing commercial MOUs and contracts. So FFI was pretty much the first mover, or RWE with H2U, I should say. And but FFI just really made the headlines with large amounts of hydrogen to be delivered to the German energy utility company E.ON, 5 million tons by 2030, or delivering to the German chemical company Covestro. FFI also has quite a few people employed in Germany and Europe, and works with the German rail company Deutsche Bahn on an ammonia engine, and with the company TES H2 on e-methanation. Also, we've seen the trucks that they are converting to battery electric heavy haul trucks for their mines. That's in collaboration with Liebherr, and they work with Airbus as well. And just to tie in with Jeremy's presentation about e-methanation, I'm going to hopefully talk about a little bit about the opportunities there between Germany and Australia. They do involve carbon. So carbon capture and storage will definitely play a big role. Just last month, we heard that Linde was selected as preferred partner in South Australia's hydrogen plant, along with ATCO. Also last month, ThyssenKrupp Uhde was declared preferred partner in Copenhagen Infrastructure Partners Murchison project in WA, and they already have collaborations with Orica and Arc Energy in Australia. In August, RWE, the biggest German, I think it's the biggest German utility company, has declared it will invest $6 billion by 2030 in Australia in renewable energy, and that is without counting in the offshore wind. And this week, Remondis was pretty much unveiling its first hydrogen-operated refuse truck. Also, we heard that Daimler Truck and BMW are sending fuel cell electric vehicles / trucks to Australia in the next year or years to come. So just to talk about the potential and the challenges of the bilateral hydrogen trade, Germany is really following a two-pronged approach in Australia. One is it would like to contribute to the ramp up of the Australian hydrogen market by providing its expertise and technology. It is also a big off-taker, so it goes both ways. And if you imagine, even though that's a bit like reading the tea leaves, but roughly there is a capacity for Australia to export 25 to say 45 million tons of green hydrogen by the middle of the century, and for Germany to import 12. So you can see there is definitely a potential there. But of course, unlike with Japan, hydrogen will never be transported, or not at this stage as hydrogen, but it will most likely be transported in a first step as ammonia. And if we get the carbon sources sorted, then as methanol and a sustainable aviation fuel, and also as green iron. Watch this space. There might be some more feasibility studies on this topic coming along. The transport costs, as we've seen through the high supply study, is not a deal breaker. And that is why the ports are in intense talks on both sides, getting hydrogen ready and talking about how to store or create hydrogen on site. And I've mentioned the trilateral initiative TriHub, which is exactly that. It's another feasibility study of how can green hydrogen be produced in Australia, in this case in WA, and be transported to Europe's largest energy port, which is Rotterdam. The challenges remain a little bit on the certification side. Sorry, one up. Because it's not, the guarantee of origin is not in place yet, but we've covered a lot of ground, so that should be imminent. What really is needed is more policies and regulation in the longer term that would all create some offtake. So, for example, in the heavy haulage transport industry, there is pretty much no incentive whatsoever to decarbonize. Aviation and shipping, it's a little bit of the same. Whilst Qantas, for example, has a self-imposed aim of 10% sustainable aviation fuel by 2030, that is not legislated, unlike Japan, where there is a legislated aim of having 10% sustainable aviation fuel by 2030. Actually, I think it's even sooner, 2027. Jeremy, correct me if I'm wrong. Heavy industry only has the safeguard mechanism. That is not enough. And even ammonia can just be made out of natural gas these days. And in Australia, unlike in the EU, where there is now a clear mandate of using 42% of green hydrogen wherever hydrogen is being used. So all of those things, as I said before, create offtake and therefore FID. All of these would be necessary for German companies to kick in. There is probably, even though I said there is skilled workforce in Australia, there's not enough of it. And it is certainly one of the biggest, if not the biggest bottleneck coming up, not just in the production of green hydrogen, but for the production of renewable energy in itself. Standards need to be aligned. At the moment, Australia has all sorts of its own standards, but if you've spoken to anyone who's trying to or scrambling to adjust an electrolyzer delivered from doesn't matter where to adapt to Australian standards, they are talking about 18 months or so. I wonder if that can be streamlined and to what extent Australia has to always have its very particular own standards, because any simplification here would definitely speed up the time to operation. We've also heard lately how there is a cross-departmental task force in America. So the USA now have a hydrogen task force that stretches across 11 departments and on secretary level. South Australia has a task force that goes across at least 4 departments. So those are very good examples for what government can do if they do put their mind to it. Something like that in Australia would certainly be very welcome. Just to sum it up, what needs to happen for Germany to step in? Germany does offer the expertise in plant design and construction. They're actually almost pretty unique in that. They've proven that locally time and time again. And of course, as we all know, they are great providers of components for not only electrolysis and green hydrogen, but generally gas production and also production and generation of renewable energy. But it does need an Australian project to actually, and a big one, to actually break ground and really provide some learnings. It does need the credibility that a supply chain would bring, for example, electrolyzer manufacturing down under, and definitely the long-term commitment and support from governments. It's something that's legislated for more than one legislative period. Obviously, and this is where I'm just going to go back to Jeremy's carbon capture and utilization, any very comprehensive projects such as aviation fuels or e-methanol, even urea production, all of that would be very beneficial to the ramp up of the Australian green hydrogen market, but also products that could be exported to Germany. And that was it from my side. It's a great opportunity. We're working in a very exciting field. Please feel free to contact me, and thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, Florence, for your very kind sharing of the Germany and Australia hydrogen or renewable collaborations. So as you've mentioned the H2 Global Reserve Auction Scheme in your presentation, I'm wondering if you could tell us more about the scheme and its potential impact on the industry.
Sure. So the scheme has 3 steps, should I say, and 3 sectors. So the first step or sector was ammonia, followed by methanol, followed by sustainable aviation fuel. In those, the highest bidder for green ammonia will be, so this scheme takes the highest price for green ammonia, but also the lowest production price. They won't match in the foreseeable very near future. So there will always be a gap. The highest bidder won't pay as much as the, again, lowest provider or lowest bidding provider will offer. That gap will be covered by what's called the the H2 Global Foundation. It's also called a contract for difference. And the first tranche has already been called, and the winners, so both the bidders will be the off-taker and the supplier, should be announced, I think, sometime early next year. And then we'll go on with methanol and with sustainable aviation fuel. And that scheme was so successful that the European Bank is now using the same model. The Netherlands already is, to actually extend that scheme onto a European level.
Thank you, Flores. And one more question. Australia has been positioning itself as a leading hydrogen exporter and production site for many years. So when comparing to the other potential export nations, what factor do you think make Australia stand out?
Yeah, so if you look at the other countries around Europe, there are talks. Of course, Norway is in a really good position, and Norway is a very, very interesting prospect because of the way they produce hydrogen. It's not green at the moment, it's blue, to just go back to the colors for a moment. Other than that, Spain and Portugal are in a good position, but they won't probably be able to supply enough hydrogen or green hydrogen, and it would have to be piped, but there are no comprehensive pipeline networks yet on the mainland. Then you're looking at North Africa, which is of course close, but the hydrogen conversations between Germany and Morocco were stalled in May 2021 when Germany didn't recognize the West Sahara as being Moroccan. Just as early as last year did Algeria cut off, and I think I'm right, the gas supply to Spain because they accepted the West Sahara as being Moroccan, and then all the gas was diverted to Italy. So just to give you a bit of a flavor for, and I could go on about that, but it is just, it's different. You need to have a very reliable relationship because we've seen what it means, and Germany in particular, when you become too reliant on one supplier. And then, of course, there is Canada, the United States, and South Africa, but they are almost as far away from Europe. And you're looking at different factors there, for example, in South America, financial stability or other things. And all in all, when you look at the whole picture, Australia is a pretty attractive supplying country, even though it's far away. Kim, you're smiling. Do you agree with that? Good to hear. Couldn't hear you right now.
Florence, thanks again for your generous answers. And I agree the collaboration between Australia and Germany in global hydrogen trade capitalize on their complementary strengths, like Australia's renewable energy resources and Germany's industrial expertise to drive innovation, create economic opportunities, and contribute to global efforts in transitioning towards a more sustainable energy future. After learning Australia's international hydrogen collaboration with diverse leading market and trade partners, let's zoom in and have a further look at Australia's emerging state that has set its own ambitious target of green hydrogen and regulatory support. Now let's welcome Ms. Kim Ankler, Director for Hydrogen, Climate and Future Industries, Tasmania. And she will shed light on how Tasmanian government is supporting a thriving green hydrogen industry with supportive policy and global partnership. Welcome, Kim.
But thank you for inviting me today to present to you on what the Tasmanian government is doing to support a thriving green hydrogen industry in Tasmania with global partnerships. Thank you. Firstly, in recognition of the deep history and culture of this island, I would like to acknowledge and pay our respects to all Tasmanian Aboriginal people, the traditional owners of the land upon which I come from you today. So next slide. Through the next slide, please. So before I start to explain our hydrogen plans and projects, I actually wanted to set the scene about why Tasmania is a great collaborative international partner. And the next slide, please. And sees itself as a leader in the production and use of green hydrogen in the future. So Tasmania is absolutely unique. We're one of 7 places in the world to be 100% self-sufficient in renewable electricity generation, and we've been that since October 2020. And the government has a legislated target to double our renewable energy by 200% by 2040. So that will add another 10,500 gigawatt hours of baseload green energy into Tasmania's system. But not only that, we're zero net emissions, and we've been net zero emissions since 2014. But the government wasn't going to let rest on its laurels, and this year has amended our Climate Change Act to set zero emissions targets for every industry in Tasmania by 2030. Now, this is actually really important because the government's an owner of a lot of the industries in the state, including its ports, its energy businesses, but also its rail network and the bus network. So the government is trying to set a very strong signal that not only will we are zero net emissions, we want to decarbonise all of our industries in Australia, and that provides in really important use cases for green hydrogen. We also have a large proportion of dispatchable hydropower and abundant fresh water. In fact, Tasmania is 1% of the land, and we've seen a few of the visions of Australia with Tasmania right down the bottom today. But we hold 12% of Australia's fresh water here. So that gives us really the largest storage capacity, not only in Australia, but Hydro Tasmania, who's our state-owned energy generator, is the largest water manager in the Southern Hemisphere. We also have reliable world-class on and offshore wind resources with a capacity for expansion, and I'll talk about that a little more today. We have 5 deep water ports and industrial precincts, and you can see a photo down the bottom there of Bell Bay, which also has available land to access high-quality infrastructure in those precincts. And we heard earlier from, I think it was Trevor, who talked about Australia's low-cost, clean and reliable renewable energy. Well, Tasmania has the lowest wholesale markets. So we're very much ready to go. Next slide, please. So in terms of our renewable energy, we have a strong pipeline of generation projects. So in Tasmania, you'll see there on the slide, we have 3 green renewable energy zones and 2 offshore zones. We've got 7 gigawatts planned to be online by 2030, but 28 gigawatts of projects are in various stages of development. Really importantly, we have the link there, the blue link popped out of at the top of Tasmania. That's the Marinus link. And so the financial investment decision for that link will provide 750 megawatts of energy, which will be either exported or imported from the mainland by 2030. So that will allow up for 800 megawatts of new firmed load in Tasmania. Thank you. Next slide. And then, of course, the Australian government has recently announced the top half or 10,000 square metres of an offshore energy zone. So they're consulting on that at the moment, but that's extremely important for us in our development of our renewable energy ambitions, which will underpin development of our hydrogen industry in Tasmania. Next slide, please. I'm going to try and go through these slides quickly so we can make up some time. So our Hydrogen Action Plan, the government released that in March in 2020, with a vision that Tasmania will use its existing and expandable renewable energy resources that I've just explained to you to become a leader in large-scale renewable hydrogen production. And then from 2030, will be a significant global supplier of renewable hydrogen for export and domestic use. So an extremely ambitious agenda, and my team's job is to try and get us there. So the goals are by 2024, we would have commenced production of renewable hydrogen, and there's an electrolyser actually in the state now that'll be our first production of 250 kilograms a day of green hydrogen, and that's going to support our bus trial that's going to commence next year of three hydrogen buses and a refueler in Hobart. And that export-based production projects are well advanced, and I'll talk about those, but we have some international players and businesses we've all heard about today, very interested in setting up in Bell Bay and in other parts of Tasmania. And then by 2027, we would have commenced export of renewable hydrogen. So that aligns with the hydrogen head start timeframes for these big projects. And then by 2030, we're a significant global producer, but also that we're using renewable hydrogen in Tasmania. And at the time that the Renewable Hydrogen Action Plan was released, the $50 million flagship program was also released. And if we go to the next slide, please. I'll talk a little bit about what we funded under that program later, but one of the key components of our Renewable Hydrogen Action Plan was to investigate the value of setting up a Tasmanian green hydrogen hub. And that plan has come to fruition. So Bell Bay is a key industrial hub in the north of the state, and it's ideally suited. It supports speed to market for Tasmania before 2030 of green hydrogen in Tasmania. Because of our green grid, the government is only considering green hydrogen projects and green hydrogen investment, but that also includes its derivatives such as green ammonia and green methanol. The port that we're looking at in front of us is only at 30% capacity. So not only do we have these deep water ports, but Bell Bay itself has a lot of capacity at the moment to support speed to market and these big scale up export production facilities. We have, as part of our export production, Able Energy, who's looking at developing 300 tonnes per annum of green methanol. Woodside Energy, that's looking at a stage one of 250 megawatts of green ammonia. Fortescue Future Industries was looking at the same of green ammonia, and Origin Energy, which is looking at starting from about 500 to 600 post 2030 once the Marinus Link gets up and running. We have been allocated $70 million from the Australian government, as we heard before, and the state government's putting in $230 million. So the scale of the first investment in Bell Bay is 300 megawatts, and that restriction is only due to, so we've got enough water we're getting into the site, and we've just passed legislation to provide bulk water into Bell Bay for hydrogen production. But it's really just the bringing on the new renewables and providing reactive dynamic support into Bell Bay. So we've scaled it at 300 megawatts as a first stage, but building out to 2 gigawatts by 2040. And the government's role is to provide open access infrastructure, so water, transmission and ports. But then also, if you turn on the next page, the Bell Bay Hydrogen Hub project is not just looking at export, it's also following world's best practice for hydrogen hubs. And we have these 6 areas of local market activation within that zone that we've identified as kickstarting domestic use cases for hydrogen. And there's up to $20 million in trials and demonstration projects by 2027-28. Once we have that deal signed. So deal's not quite signed yet with the Australian government, but hopefully before Christmas or soon after Christmas, we'll hear about that. So the areas for us are marine and maritime. So that's working on what Tasmania already does best. And then how can we, with shipbuilding and maritime research and development. And then we're moving into transport, industry, so minerals processing. In Bell Bay itself, we host Bell Bay Aluminium, so looking at green steel there right on site and pretty much at the doorstep, as well as Liberty Bell Bay. And there's other processing plants nearby that need to be decarbonised. Tasmania's got the youngest gas network in Australia, so our pipes are only 19 years old and ready to be 100% hydrogen fuelled. And there's a gas network in Bell Bay. We'd be looking at use cases for agriculture, but then also importantly, Tasmania's Australia's gateway to Antarctica. And I'll talk about that in a very short while. Thank you, because we absolutely need to be leveraging our opportunity for how do we help support the decarbonisation of Antarctica, but also the shipping to Antarctica, not just of Australia's exploration down there, but of our other international partners. Next slide, please. So you'll get this slide pack to have a look at. So please come back to us if any questions. I think I've touched most of the of what we're doing here in Tasmania now, except to say that we've just recently opened an $8 million Renewable Hydrogen Industry Development Fund for local projects. We have some smaller, between 5 to 10 megawatt transport and industry projects here in the state at the moment. We can't help them all, so we're running a competitive process. Next slide, please. So one of the elements over the last few years in Tasmania we are so proud of is the fact that we have developed Australia's first international engagement and export strategy. And as James pointed out earlier, Australia itself needs a clear and focused policy framework and action for international collaboration and partnerships. And we believe we're leading the way. So not only do we have this strategy, and that's about leveraging what we've got here, but supporting and facilitating research and development. And it's really building capability together from our international partners. And we've activated that strategy by having a memorandum of understanding with the Port of Rotterdam, but also with Flanders Investment and Trade in Belgium. And there's been trade visits here. And in particular, 2 weeks ago, we've had a company representative here, and we're really focused on that business to business in maritime, regulatory collaboration and demonstration projects. And we're the first state to have a declaration of intent with the German province of Bremen and their port of Bremerhaven. And it's really, again, around collaborating and learning from Europe and what's worked well then to be able to learn ourselves as we focus on Asia. We've also been supporting trade missions, Tasmania trade missions to Japan and the Republic of South Korea this year. And hydrogen's a hot topic, let me tell you. And as we work on to our final slide today, as I sort of rush through this, the opportunities for green hydrogen in Antarctica are immense. We are working with the Antarctic Division and some of our international partners on collaboration on active Antarctic polar programs. Given that we have methanol and that's beginning to be quite a promising option for a synthetic fuel or a decarbonised fuel for the shipping to Antarctic, but also the Southern Ocean, we really believe that Tasmania has a leadership role to play in Antarctica, and we host the Australian Maritime College, the CSIRO, the Institute of Marine and Antarctic Studies, as well as the University of Tasmania right here. And we can only blame ourselves if we don't take this opportunity to really see and use the closeness of Antarctica as our closest export market to really make a difference in decarbonising that pristine environment down there. And a lot of our international engagement has really started with collaboration on Antarctica and then expanded into how we can learn and collaborate together and try and develop real projects and real demonstration projects in Tasmania. So thank you, and apologies again for the clumsy start to the presentation today. But thank you. I'm happy to take any questions, but I know that we're running a bit short of time, everybody.
Thank you again for your really kind sharing of Tasmania's hydrogen roadmap. And I'm sure it's a really solid presentation for our audience who are eager to explore the hydrogen opportunities in Tasmania. Yeah, sure. So during your presentation, we've received some questions. So first of all, Kim, what do you think is the biggest challenge for establishing the green hydrogen industry in Tasmania?
And that's a great question. I think that the biggest challenge in Tasmania is really the regulatory process. So it's landing one of these big projects. So we have a number of them, but it's really bringing on the renewable energy investment in the state. And that's around making sure and streamlining the regulatory approvals processes for onshore wind, in particular in the state.
Thank you, Em. So as we all know, the community support is always a really important part of establishing industry anywhere in the world. So what is the community's sentiment towards hydrogen in Tasmania?
Well, at the moment, community sentiment is very positive. So we have quite an engaged community here that are very supportive of our climate change targets, and they really care about the environment as well. So yes, at the moment we have bipartisan support for the politicians and in our parliament, but our community is kind of waiting really for projects to come on board. And we're trying to use our bus trial, for example, that's coming on board next year, not to demonstrate that buses work, but to really start bringing our community on board, getting them on renewable infrastructure, such as hydrogen buses, and show that they're safe.
Thank you, Kim. As we all know, every state in Australia now has its own hydrogen target and ambition. So do you think there is a competition between the states in Australia? And what is Tasmania's advantages among this so-called competition?
Thanks. Another good question. I think when the hydrogen strategies all started to roll out in early 2020, 21, it did feel like that there was a lot of competition between states. But I think now, as there is enough to go around, absolutely. I think all of Australia, and we feel that we're supporting each other in the development of our hydrogen industries. And as we've heard today, there is global demand. Not even if all of the Australian projects got up, it wouldn't be enough. So I think now what I'm seeing, particularly with the review of the National Hydrogen Strategy, is states working together and actually pushing the Australian government to, as Florence indicated, to be quick to adapt international standards, to be really focusing on the legislative framework to make it quite consistent across states. And I really feel that there is a lot of collaboration. And as I said, I think that even though we've been quietly going around our business down here in Tasmania, I think we're actually leading the way and really pushing collaboration across states.
Thank you, Kim. Thanks again for your generous answers. And we also believe the Tasmanian government will continue to foster these international partnerships and strengthen relations through facilitating and attending trade delegations everywhere in the world. And now it comes to an end. Yeah, thank you, Kim. And now it comes to an end of today's Impact webinar. It's evident that the synergy among nations in APAC region and globally is driving a paradigm shift towards a greener and more sustainable future. The discussion today have illuminated the immense potential and the collaborative spirit shaping the hydrogen landscape. As we move forward, it's really crucial to emphasize the significance of continued collaborations and shared efforts. The commitment made today by stakeholders from Australia, Japan, South Korea, Singapore, and Europe underscore collective dedication to harnessing the full potential of green hydrogen. Once again, please remember, today's Impact webinar is a global launch of Australia and APAC's largest and most influential hydrogen event, Connecting Green Hydrogen 2024, which will take place from July 9th to July 11th at the Melbourne Convention and Exhibition Centre. In addition to your participation in today's webinar, we also look forward to meeting you in person at this flagship hydrogen events, which brings together the highest level of decision makers across entire hydrogen value chains, including Air Products, Origin Energy, Engine, ARENA, APA Group, Sumitomo Corporation, Stanwell, Queensland Government, Korean Ministry of Trade, Industry, Energy, and much more to expect. To discuss the latest innovations and fill your business future by meaningful connections. Our journey doesn't end here, it's just the beginning. The identified next steps are not just aspirations, but also actionable goals. They demand concerted efforts and collaborations among government, industry, and industry innovators. We hope you found this discussion of today's insightful and informative. Thank you for your participation. See you next time.